Stranded at Davos? How sad. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was reportedly abandoned at the elite World Economic Forum due to more malfunctioning aircrafts from Boeing, his former corporate client. Upon his planned return from Switzerland last week, he boarded a Boeing 747 plane, but a, quote, critical issue with the aircraft grounded Blinken, forcing him to fly home on a smaller jet, per the lever. Again, how sad. There was a reported failure of the plane's oxygen system. According to the lever, NBC News reports that there was an oxygen leak.
And more Boeing news: claims of safety issues and falsified records can enable President Joe Biden to rescind an immunity deal that allowed Boeing to avoid criminal prosecution on allegations of fraud, per lever reporting. The Federal Aviation Administration has also paused Boeing's planned expansion of its 737 MAX aircraft production, but cleared 737 MAX 9 inspection instructions, allowing for the planes to be ungrounded in the coming days, per CNBC. Journalist at The Lever, Katya Schwenk, joins us now to discuss her latest Boeing reporting. Welcome, Katya.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, can you give us just a little bit of background as to why this is happening? We covered the story where the emergency door flew off mid-flight. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. As we just mentioned, that kind of plane has been grounded since then, but it looks like that grounding is going to be lifted shortly. Why are all of these problems happening with this particular company's planes?
Yeah, I mean, that is the question. I think that Boeing, I think it's important to remember that it's important not to think of the Alaska Airlines flight as a freak accident. I think what a lot of people are saying is that Boeing has had a company culture that has led to this point where, they are putting trying to put planes on the runways, prioritizing profits over passenger safety. So, yeah.
Help me overcome I have a little bit of skepticism of this, I guess, I mean, not skepticism that this is happening. I've seen the video footage of the door coming off the plane and all of that. But we had another guest on to talk about this last week, I think. And, I look at the statistics, and planes remain extremely safe, virtually no crashes since, I think, 2009. A few deaths, but not, I mean, it's like statistically almost no danger whatsoever, especially compared to other modes of transportation. So I guess how concerned should we actually be? Are the planes really becoming less safe if it's not borne out in any of the statistics?
Sure. I mean, I don't know that the question is necessarily about whether or not, planes are statistically more dangerous, than cars, whether, we're worried about like flight crashes all the time that are going to be killing hundreds of people. I think the question here is that, there should be a zero tolerance policy for something like the Alaska Airlines incident. We should not have, Boeing planes having a door panel blowing out over mid-flight, right? So how have we gotten to a point where, this is allowed to happen, where federal regulators are, unable to prevent this from happening, and we are investigating it, after the fact. So again, I think the question is less about, whether or not the planes are safe to fly, and more about how are we getting to this point where we're seeing these very serious failures broadcasted. We're seeing TikTok videos of these extremely serious failures from planes from a flagship U.S. company,
And that planes are, I think, getting less safe is the concern, and where will it end?
Right.
It's worth noting, of course, as you write about in The Lever, that in 2018 and 2019, there were Boeing plane crashes in Indonesia and Ethiopia that killed 346 people combined. And you write about how in the wake of that, there was only one criminal fraud charge brought against Boeing. And you argue that this has something to do with policies that went into effect in the Trump administration. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this story goes back, several years to these crashes that killed 346 people in 2018 and 2019. And what we saw was really an extremely limited criminal investigation that resulted in only a single fraud charge brought against Boeing as a result of these crashes that, alleged that Boeing executives had hidden important information about this flight control system that ultimately caused the crashes from federal regulators. And instead of, a really full-blown criminal investigation, a prosecution, a trial, we get a single criminal charge. And what was essentially a sweetheart deal for Boeing, in which they did not have to, they, signed a deal with prosecutors the day that they were charged. They had to pay a fine, do some, additional compliance work. And now they are essentially spared from prosecution, if this continues to go through. And, now I think with these new safety allegations, with these questions of fraud at one of Boeing's suppliers, there are new questions around whether this deal is going to hold.
So can you just explain to the audience, because it might not be clear, why would Donald Trump or any president seek to insulate Boeing from litigation?
Yeah, so what happened was called a deferred prosecution agreement. This is a type of agreement that is often used in these big corporate cases, in which federal prosecutors, make a deal with company executives before any prosecution is done, before the case is allowed to go to trial. So this is, common practice in big corporate fraud cases, in white collar crime cases. And, I think it really speaks to the way in which Boeing has arguably bought out Washington, and, really been able to secure its own interests.
Can you remind our viewers, I know you've written about this previously, about Nikki Haley's connection to Boeing and what she has done on their behalf?
Sure. Nikki Haley served on Boeing's board from 2019 to 2020. She quit allegedly because she was disappointed by Boeing's seeking of, a federal buyout. But, Nikki Haley's history with Boeing goes long back before that, when she was governor of South Carolina, in which she assisted Boeing get deals with the state, in which she union busted against Boeing's factory workers in South Carolina. So Nikki Haley has a long history with Boeing, which culminated on her sitting on Boeing's board and, helping block shareholder agreements that would have ensured more transparency around Boeing's lobbying efforts.
Yeah, when Bill McGee was on the show last week, he mentioned that there used to be a saying, unless it's Boeing, I'm not going, indicating that the company was known for having very high safety standards and controls, and then went on to say that that is no longer the phrase people use. It sounds more like, if it's Boeing, I ain't going these days, quite literally for Antony Blinken being stranded there, as we covered at the top. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us some insight into what's been going on here.
Thank you for having me.